Back when I was a child, I used to celebrate my birthdays by inviting all of my classmates at my house for a few hours of fun. My home resided in a quiet suburban neighborhood permeated by short stretches of woodland and was surrounded by a beautiful garden, a labor of love nurtured by my grandfather. That garden was also the main attraction for my idea of entertainment, since my goal was to take my birthday guests on a fantastical adventure across its diverse layout, which was filled with roses, gardenias, and carnations, as well as medium-sized fruit-bearing trees, all of which I had made part of the intricate lore that I had built for the place. I would narrate to my friends of lost treasures that had been buried beneath its ground, of a hidden group of pirates that had made a lair in our back porch, of leprechauns that wandered about in search of gold, and fairies that hid among the tree branches, watching us. I can still remember the wonder in the eyes of my friends, staring at me in both disbelief but also acknowledgement, this odd silver lining that exists in the minds of children where there still lies the conviction that everything, even the most absurd of concepts, is possible, despite everything around you perhaps pointing to the mundane being the norm. After my speech was done, we would then break out into groups and each take on a quest, with one group responsible for finding the pirates and taking their treasure map, another seeking out the leprechauns and following them to see where they hid their gold, a third one having to climb the trees and befriend the fairies, and we would spread out in search of our respective goals, our brains teeming with imagination. While these small adventures were incredibly fun, what was the most interesting part of these excursions was their end, after we would regroup near the conclusion of our time together for the day, and we would each share our separate tales of what we experienced, and everyone had an inventively exciting story to tell. We would hear about how one group barely managed to escape the pirate den with their lives, another of how they followed the leprechaun to a corner of the garden at which point it vanished and was never seen again, a third of how they climbed at the top of a tree and witnessed the fairy kingdom but were unable to get close because it was guarded carefully. All of these children that, for all intents and purposes, were quite different from one another, all of them chose to become part of the dream, chose to let go of the mundane and immerse themselves in the impossible for a few hours, as a result experiencing something that no one would ever be able to take away from them, something that had played its part in the opening of their minds to something more being out there than just the things we can see. Having pondered those days repeatedly over the years, I was easily able to trace my flame for the creative having been ignited as a result of my mother's love of fairy tales, something for which I will forever be grateful to her. From a very young age, she would give me books to read about a variety of myths and legends as well as classic folklore tales, and would always encourage me to keep an open mind to an unseen world separate to our own, a realm of beings both friendly and hostile, and taught me to be respectful of people that held beliefs that could be considered dubious by most. My imagination was further strengthened over the years as I became increasingly exposed to a variety of different artistic endeavors like cartoons, comic books, toys, and video games that proliferated during the 1990s and early 2000s, all of which kept feeding the fire of creation inside of me and making it more and more apparent that my calling was that of the storyteller, someone meant to craft and weave tales of his own to share with the world. It was why I loved taking my friends on those imaginative adventures across our garden, why I adored making up intricate backstories for my toy figures as I played with them, why I relished daydreaming of new fictions that I could one day bring to life in some way. It wasn't until 7th grade that I actually got the chance to truly demonstrate my mettle as a talesmith, a time that, to this day, I consider to have been paramount in my decision to actually pursue a career as a writer of fictional stories. It was during those days that I got introduced to a little-known game called Dungeons & Dragons by a new friend I was fortunate to meet on my first day back at school from the summer holidays. For those unfamiliar with it, Dungeons & Dragons, most commonly referred to as D&D, is a tabletop role-playing game that requires the use of the most powerful tools at our disposal in order to play it, namely creativity and imagination. The idea behind it is that one person takes on the role of the storyteller, who is responsible for coming up with an adventure that the rest of the players will get to experience as personas of their choice, such as brave fighters, cunning rogues, or powerful wizards, just to name a few possibilities, and it all takes place inside each individual's head. The storyteller narrates and describes how the world and surroundings of the players look like, what smells, sights, and noises they experience, and the players manifest those senses in their mind's eye and explain how they wish to act and behave accordingly. For For me, getting introduced to this game was akin to a grand revelation. It was the ultimate form of escapism, the first time in my life that I felt like I was living two separate existences, one as myself, the shy, timid, insecure teenager, and another as Evenos, a powerful, fearless cleric of the god of light, always ready to banish and destroy the demons that lurked in the dark. I felt brave and indomitable as Evenos. He never hesitated. He always stood up for himself and those in need. He had people that admired him and looked up to him, people he had rescued. I wasn't like that. I was alone, scared. I couldn't banish the demons that lurked in the dark. My demon had infested my own house. I always did my best to come home late, hoping to slip in unnoticed, and would spend most of the night awake, trembling beneath my blanket and wishing I was more like Evenos as the demon's growls reverberated across the dark. It wasn't long before I transitioned from player to storyteller and started, reluctantly, to craft my own adventures, wishing to test my skill as a world builder and tale craftsman in this incredibly exciting format. At the beginning I was nervous about my stories, unsure whether my friends would find them to their liking, but those doubts were quickly extinguished as my buddies found themselves completely absorbed by my narratives and kept asking for more, which did wonders for my self-confidence. I found myself spending hours every day developing increasingly intricate stories for them to partake in, twisting mysteries populated by complex characters and terrifying creatures manifested by my own mind. We would go hours every night until morning, me giving it my all to describe the larger-than-life visions I had in my head as vividly as possible, while my friends immersed themselves more and more in the universe I had created to the point where they had built a secondary life in it, complete with professional careers as alchemists, blacksmiths, and guild masters, with some of them even having ended up in meaningful relationships with their imaginary spouses and children, or even leading their own kingdoms. It was truly a magical time for me, a necessary time, a time that allowed me to escape the darkness infecting my mind and my home. I was happy when I was creating. I felt in control, a concept which I was very much lacking in my actual life. My world was one of complete uncertainty and constant fear, but that wasn't the case for the worlds and stories I was making. There I had control over every lake and mountain, every city and village, every character that inhabited them and every monster that threatened them, every betrayal, every friendship, every twist. They were all by design. It was that idea of being in control that eventually led me to try and write my first short story. You see, when playing Dungeons and Dragons, part of the fun was the fact that it was a shared experience, one where, while I did have a decent amount of control over the narrative happenings, so did my friends with their characters' actions, which was, and still is, why I love it so much. That being said, at some point I began to feel an increasing need to make something in which every aspect of the story and characters would be guided by myself only, and so one day, when I was about 14 years old, I finally took pencil to paper and started writing, and as I did, something extraordinary happened. I finally felt free. Free of worry, free of pain, free of stress, free of uncertainty. Every moment I spent with the stories I was writing was healing me, helping me deal with my suffering by allowing me to channel everything that was troubling me into them. Given my troubled past, it was of no surprise to me that the genres I ended up focusing on the most were those of horror, mystery, and dark fantasy, as I fueled a large degree of my creative force with the negative feelings that had been plaguing me for years. But as dark and somewhat depressing or melancholy many of my stories ended up being, I felt truly happy. Happy that I had finally found a healthy way for me to funnel my pain in a way that not only didn't hurt anyone, but had the potential to help others deal with their own problems, either by identifying with my characters and their own ordeals, or simply by entertaining them and providing a much-needed break from reality. I'm somewhat ashamed to admit that, before I found a path forward through my storytelling endeavors, I had a lot of misery in my head that eventually led to intense thoughts of leaving this world behind, as I simply couldn't see a way out of my pain. The fact that I'm still here I owe to that magnificent spark they call creativity, a spark that ignited into a bonfire fueled, to a large extent, by suffering and depression. I sometimes miss that child from the 90s, running around the garden with his friends while avoiding pirates and searching for leprechaun gold. He was kind and innocent. He was a good kid. and I truly wish I could go back and warn him of the things coming for him. But at the same time, it was those things that made him who I am today, a stronger, more resilient version of who I was many years ago, which does make me wonder, was I to help him avoid those ordeals? Would I be helping him or hurting him? I don't know. I guess it's one of those things you can only wonder about.